Does your father-in-law deal with cars
all day long?
Could he, unload that thing for me to somebody? He knows people.
He does, but not people that hate themselves.
No. What does that have to do with anything?
A Dart is a
Somebody wants that
it's a
car.
great piece of
I have to
Americana.
find the somebody.
I know.
All right. Welcome back to Sermon Rewind. My name is Todd, or the Dadalorian, and with me, as always, is Jordan, who represents the fragile ocean today.
Good afternoon, good morning, depending upon when you're watching it. Good to see you.
All right, fantastic. So we're here again for Sermon Rewind, and we're still in Thessalonians.
Absolutely.
Yes. The title of the sermon today, not today, the other day, was How the Church is Sustained. And the text was from 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 17 through chapter 3, verse 13.
Yep.
Quite a passage.
Big
quite
chunk.
quite a bit for the reader to read.
Yeah.
So I'm going to jump right into the title and ask you whether that title, How the Church is Sustained, is that the goal?
It is temporarily. It is for the moment, for however long this moment on earth is. Yeah, for sure.
So your sermon title could have been How the Church is Sustained for the Moment.
Sure, could have been. But nobody wants a long title that no one reads. You might as well have a short one that a few people will read.
Okay. But how do we interpret that statement? How the church is sustained.
Okay, so
It's
maybe,
just at face value.
yeah. We should interpret it as not only an invitation to, but an arching reason for why we should stick it out, fight the good fight together, put up with one another, love one another, serve one another, because we need each other. And in this weird white-hot cauldron of chaos that is the regular gathering of the Christian folk, we find that even though, like I said, we don't always get what we want, we definitely get what we need from it.
So how do I differentiate between the church universal,
Mhm.
right, the bride of Christ, and how most people come to interpret the church as my local congregation that I meet with, which may or may not have a shelf life,
Ooh, that's a great
and
question.
may or may not have a arc of, say, ministry effectiveness based on a variety of factors.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe the easier way of saying it is that you're grafted in, big picture, universal church, right? We are connected by the blood to people that walk with Jesus from all over the globe, but we're not legitimately geographically connected to them, right? There's brothers and sisters I'm never going to meet on this side of heaven. However, I do have a calling to serve a local context in which I am rubbing shoulders and arguing with and loving and talking through things with in the local assembly for sure.
Okay. So in your first point, you were talking about desiring the best for one another,
Mm-hmm.
and you're again referring to the church.
Yeah.
So you were talking a little bit about emotions, that it shouldn't just be feelings alone that sort of fuel this.
Yeah.
You and I have gone back and forth about this a little bit, particularly around the word passion,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. Notice I didn't say that.
No,
on
I
Sunday.
understand. Yeah. And if you would have, I would have smiled at you, and then you would have gotten distracted.
Yeah.
But you see passion as more of an emotion word, right? I define passion more as sort of a sustained dedication to something over time, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to get all...
Which I don't have a problem with that definition.
No, I know
Yeah.
you don't. I don't want to get all sort of scientific and physiological and sort of get into biology and the juices in our brain and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But to sort of say I'm being emotional now versus I'm not being emotional about this, are we really equipped to kind of differentiate those quantities? Is there such a thing as, being emotional for the kingdom and not being emotional for the kingdom?
Yeah, I guess I would almost stop you and say, I get where you're going with that. I almost don't even think that's the big concern for me. The bigger concern for me was that we have too many people that are satisfied with just being or just feeling emotions within the kingdom. So you've got a lot of folks who they understand desire in the same way that I would argue with you about that term passion, right? There are just too many people who say, I'm passionate about this because I feel a certain way when we talk about it, right? So you could say, I'm passionate about children because children make me feel a certain way. That doesn't necessarily mean that I'm on the hook to seek the best interest of children. I don't lose sleep at night per se, knowing that there are children out there who are suffering. My passion is subjected almost entirely to just how I feel in the moment. There are far too many Christians that have just said, that's enough. As long as I'm feeling something, as long as there's something going on in me, good, bad, or indifferent, as long as there's something there, then that's all this is. I'm trying to make the argument, no, desire can't live there. Like, you can feel stuff, you should feel stuff, but desire for other brothers and sisters to flourish, to do well, it can't just live there. That's an inadequate waste of a way to exist.
Okay, but don't you want the church to be emotional to a certain extent? I
Yeah.
mean, you sit up there sometimes and preach, and you say something which I interpret to sort of excite the people. Hey, this is a big point that I'm making right now. This is a big deal, right? This is a big concept. This should get you excited.
Yeah.
And you've got crickets, right?
Yep.
You got a bunch of just dead people sitting in the pews, listening to your sermon. And you're like, hey, hello, are you out there? So shouldn't we try to engage our hearts a little bit, even if the moments are fleeting?
Yeah.
Should we chase sort of a continuous set of emotional moments to fuel us, so that isn't just an intellectual exercise, that we have engaged our whole sort of body, mind, and soul?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I would want that, right? You know me enough to know that I'm trying to light that fire often, but it can't also just live there in the same way that it can't just be an intellectual exercise. I don't want people to check their brains at the door when they come in to worship on a Sunday morning, or if they're reading their Bibles or engaging church history. I don't want them to just say, well, I can never know, or I don't need to think about this too much, so I'm just going to write it off. We don't want that. In the same way, you also don't want people who are only emotionally connected. Oh, that was such a, I get this all the time. That was such a sweet, powerful, amazing message. Oh, awesome. What particularly shifted in you? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I just...
Or what are you going to do about it?
Right, yeah. Like, we haven't gotten
So
there
what?
yet. So that's my concern, right? Is that desire just lives at the place of I felt good in the moment, or it was nostalgic, or like, I was excited because other people were excited. Like, can't just stay there. And if we do just stay there for one another, for example, if Todd Pfeiffer, right, is going through it, he's having a rough day, and all I do is text you a praying hands emoji, and I'm just saying, man, I'm so sorry you're going through that. I hate to see you go through that. And that's it. I've failed you. Right, I have. My desire for you has not taken root in me and has not had its full effect in me in the way that it should. That's my concern. That's what I want to get after. And I would be hard pressed to assume that you would feel any differently, right?
I mean, I would still appreciate the effort.
Sure.
You did something,
Yeah.
right? As opposed to just doing nothing. If you just said, oh, Todd's not going to appreciate this, I'm not going to send him this.
But when does they just did something cease to be acceptable? Right? It's almost like if you're children, you're like, clean your room. Well, I mean, I picked up a few items of clothing. At what age or at what point do you stop applauding that, right? At what point do you say, yeah, but son, that's not enough?
Okay, sure.
Right.
But part of that is why you've encouraged us to sort of live in community with each other, get to know each other a little bit.
For sure.
You know sort of what will spark me a little bit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Let me ask you one more piece about that before I move on is, when we say desire the very best for one another, there's a piece of the living in the body, which is encouragement, but then there's also correction.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
What do we do with that? I mean, when I look at my brother and sister, and I'm not perfect, I'm a sinner saved by grace, but I sort of want to go, hey, because I love you, similar to parents with children,
Yeah.
because I love you, here's a fault I see.
Yep.
I mean, how much of that should we do? How do we approach it? I know that's a big topic in and of itself, but
all of it. Don't hold back at all. And anyone that is true, that sees themselves truly as a brother or a sister, anyone who says, this is my family, this is my tribe, my people, right? You're not going to love it in the moment. No one does. But there is a sense of charity because you've earned that in me, right? You've been, for example, if you came to me and were like, Jordan, here's a moral area I see you falling woefully short. Like, I might push back a little bit in the moment because no one likes that rub. But Todd Pfeiffer's earned that in my life. You run the course with me, right? You're in the trenches with me. You love my family. You love me. I know it and I've seen it. So I'm far more inclined to say, okay, Todd wouldn't do that for nothing. There's got to be something to that. It's when we have these very superficial relationships that don't really mean anything. It's when all we ever do is send praying emoji hands or tell you that we're sending our best thoughts to you, right? It's when that's the depth of our relationship that you could never do anything like that. I would never accept you coming over to my house and trying to correct something in me, right? There's an earned capital when you are truly, truly entrenched in the life of that other person. And if you're not, yeah, we're incapable.
So in your second point, you said sacrifice whatever it takes for one another. And you were talking about just sacrificing in general, right? This is kind of a question I've asked before. How do we know when it's hurting, right? How do we know when we're actually sacrificing? Because there's lots of things I don't want to do.
Yeah.
Right? Some things I feel like I'm able to give easily, right? Give up easily.
Sure.
I don't know sometimes if that means that I've reached a point of being able to generously give without regret, or whether I've just chosen the things that are easier for me to give.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So how do we sort of test where those points are? Because we hear about these challenges, like, when there was a need, someone went and sold a piece of property, right? Yeah. Those are scary verses for people sometimes.
Of course they
right?
are, yeah, and they should be.
How do we sort of navigate that?
I always have argued that, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this too, actually. I've always argued that the benchmark for sacrifice is that it should hurt some. And the only reason why I say it should hurt some, regardless of what it is, whether it's your time or your expertise or money, whatever it is, right? When I say that it should hurt a little, I mean that it should buck against your natural inclination, right? Like when I work hard, my natural inclination is to save money, or it's to increase my general comfort, safety, and life, right? That's why we work hard. To sacrifice in that area is if I'm working less hard or producing less for myself so that some of that is relegated to someone else in need. That hurts, right? Because it bucks against all of the normal American dream stuff, the dreams, the aspirations, the desire to thrive in my own life and in my own way. So it's got to hurt some. And if it doesn't hurt at all, I don't know that it is a sacrifice. I think by definition it can't be. So, I mean, I'm always curious what other people think about that because I know that's still very broad. So I'm curious, when you think of sacrifice, like what does that look like?
I mean, two areas sort of come to mind. You mentioned, working hard, being tired,
yeah.
right? Sometimes I wonder if it's just fatigue,
yeah.
right? I want to serve a certain amount, but then I want to protect a certain amount of my time to rest, Sabbath, however we sort of interpret that, right? Is it just about that, or is it about saying, I like to work with this group of people doing this activities. I don't like to do this group of people and these activities.
Yeah.
Now, is that because God has actually given me certain gifts and directed me towards this group to sort of, maximize what he has sort of infused into me? Or does he want me to say, look, I'll take care of it. I'll equip you.
Yeah.
You'll get through this. It may not feel natural. It may not feel comfortable, but here's a need right now, and I want you to fill it. And don't worry about whether or not this is your comfort zone, which is probably an overused phrase.
Yeah, but that's the right response.
Yeah. Okay, last question, and this is from point 3. And you said, enjoy the outcome with one another. So you're talking about celebration, right? This is always, again, a difficult sort of balance again. And Apostle Paul talks about this a lot, running the race. I mean, there was kind of this sense that Paul was always just grinding away, right? So how do we celebrate without kind of getting a big head about ourselves, patting ourselves on the back, and maybe pausing and saying, we've done enough for today, we've done enough. Or we should feel really good about the fact that we've done these things. We don't need to push ourselves any farther. We don't need to do any more. We're good for now.
Yeah.
How do you do those two things?
Yeah, I think that balancing act is probably next to impossible, naturally speaking. I think for the Christian who desires that their lifestyle and their actions be worshipful, right? I think it's very hard to take your foot off the gas. I think Paul constantly says things that give you the impression that he did not know how to rest, whether he wanted to or not. He couldn't get his heart and mind around it. Like he'd say things like, listen, I want to go be with Jesus, but it's better for you that I stay, right? So I'm going to mind my P's and Q's because I know I could I could have Rome chopping my head off tomorrow morning. I know exactly what to do. But it's better for you that I'm here. It's better for you that I'm writing letters of encouragement. It's better for you that I'm rallying the troops and sending them to you so that you're built up and the ministry continues to go out. It's better, right? So I think the Christian has to look at themselves and say, okay, if it's true, and it's not because we're necessary, right? That's a head of the needle we always have to rest on. We're not necessary. We're instruments, but the work of faithful stewarding believers in whatever context they're in, that's necessary because that's what God has chosen. So Paul understood, look, I'm not necessary. I can be replaced tomorrow, but it is necessary that the work that's being done, that the Holy Spirit chooses to do through me, continues. So I'm going to continue to give myself over to it, and I'm going to give myself over to it in a way that I can do this for as long as possible. That's the key right there. The Christian who burns out early doing way too much is of no use when it comes to longevity, right? So far less gets done. That's why Jesus said, look, I had 3 years here and I did a lot. He says, y'all are going to do way more because you're going to be around for a lot longer. The church is going to be holding its hand to the plow for much, much longer. So the Christian has to say the balance of working hard for the kingdom and resting hard for the kingdom is always so more gets done in a way that brings Jesus more glory and brings more good to the world. So Sabbath is important. And you got to read your body and know your life and know the limits in your family. And you got to live into that space very, very well. And the best way to do that, and that's why we joke a lot, but I love kind of the candor that you and I have about stuff like that. Because if I'm like, hey, I think you saying Sabbathing is an excuse, sometimes it might be, but sometimes I can look at your face and say, nah, it's probably not, right? And I know you at times can be like, hey man, maybe just don't listen to the naysayers today, or maybe just don't go and do that, or don't worry about writing that email or reading that thing right now. I don't know that you need to do that. Right now, maybe you should just take a couple breaths. You know, you put it in hard last week. Take a couple breaths before you hit the grind again. I think and this is how we celebrate well, right? We high five, we hug, we look at the fruit that is happening in the church, and then we say, he's up, let's celebrate, let's take a breather before we hit the grind running again.
All right.
Yeah.
Sounds good. And you can send me a praying emoji if you want.
Once in a while.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks again for joining us on Sermon Rewind. When you're done watching this video, I want you to scroll down on your webpage. There's a little thing called comments. I want you to write something. A little note, a question, anything. We want to hear from you. And that's it. Thanks again for joining us on Sermon Rewind.
See ya.
That work?
That'll work.
I thought that worked.
Yeah. I think it helps that you're a little bit spicy, Todd. I'm going to be honest.